Copernicus, he had a scheme, said the sun's the star of the scene. But what if we got a new dream, shattering the heliocentric mean? Middle ground, where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth, break the sound, with a center, watch us bound. Scientism got the praise, hiding facts in twisted ways. Geocentric glory days, lost in all the cosmic haze. Middle ground, where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth, break the sound, with a center, watch us bound. Philosophy, not science here. Copernican whispers in your ear. Truth is close, never fear. Look around, make it clear. Middle ground, where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth, break the sound, with a center, watch us bound. Watch us bound. Watch us bound. Philosophy, not science here. Copernican whispers in your ear. Truth is close, never fear. Look around, make it clear. Middle ground, where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth, break the sound, with a center, watch us bound. Watch us bound. Watch us bound.
Welcome to Middle Ground Episode 2, and it is titled Kinematics and Dynamics. You may not be familiar with what that means, and oftentimes when they hear the phrase, I feel like people just kind of let it melt their brain and freak out. It's actually very simple concepts, very important concepts, and I will make it abundantly clear why it's extremely important and why it is the second episode. We are streaming on X, Rumble, Rockfin, and YouTube. Soon we will be streaming natively on my own site as well. For members, share the stream. We're going to get straight to it, keep it concise, so that you understand the reasoning behind the way that I've set up the stream so far. This episode, the series, is there's a few pretty simple prerequisites that have to be understood prior to looking into the rest of this conversation, this cosmological conversation. And many people that are familiar with this discussion are very familiar with these ideas and may consider these first few presentations very simple. They are, if you're familiar, but very, very important. And so we're going to jump right into it. And you can support the stream, kofi.com/witsit. That's ko-fi.com/witsit. As well, I think we can accept super chats at the moment. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right. Kinematics and dynamics. So here are the table of contents. We have the introduction, kinematics, dynamics, the historical significance, equivalence, and the conclusion. And we're going to stay very specific to the subject to make sure that everyone understands the concept. All right. So, a brief description of each one of the sections here. We have introduction. The conflation of these concepts is the foundation of all modern cosmological confusion. Pretty big statement there, pretty big claim. Yeah. Number 2, kinematics. What is kinematics and how is it applied? 3, what is dynamics and how is it applied? 4, applicable history. What role did kinematics and dynamics play in the history of cosmology and the development of the various models? Number 5, equivalence. What is kinematic and dynamic equivalence? And what is the importance? And then the conclusion. What are the cosmological implications? All right, introduction. The importance of understanding the difference between kinematics and dynamics and the roles they play in this discussion cannot be overstated. In fact, it is the conflation or misunderstanding of these two concepts that play the biggest role in the current cosmological deception. And I put here very simply, kinematics is a description of how bodies move, and dynamics is the study of what causes them to move. Double check in. All right, audio is good. Next slide. Definitions. Kinematics is the study of motion without considering the forces causing it, focusing on aspects like position, velocity, and acceleration. It is the measurement and/or description of moving variables. Dynamics examines the forces acting on an object and how they affect its motion, essentially explaining, quote unquote, why an object moves the way it does or what causes it to do so. Austin walks around the pole in a circle. You could draw it out, you can calculate it, you can describe it geometrically. How I'm moving is kinematics, measurements of moving variables. That's it. That's all it is. Observation, description, mathematical description of the motion. That's all that kinematics is. Nothing more, nothing less. Dynamics. What force is it causing Austin to move around the pole in a circle? Right? That is the dynamic question. They're very different. It's very simple, but for some reason, it is the source of major confusion. So we're going to really drive this home before we can start to dig deeper into the rest of this cosmological discussion this series covers. So we're going to use a definition from Fundamentals of Physics, Mechanics, Relativity, and Thermodynamics by Schenker. Butcher's name, I'm sure. All right. The Newtonian procedure for predicting the future, given the present, has two parts, kinematics and dynamics. Kinematics is a complete description of the present. It's a list of what you have to know about a system right now. For example, if you're talking about a piece of chalk, you'll want to know where it is and how fast it's moving. Dynamics then tells you why the chalk goes up, why it goes down, and so on. It comes down due to the force of gravity, allegedly. In kinematics, you don't ask for the reason behind anything. You simply want to describe things the way they are. And then dynamics tells you how and why that description changes with time. I'm going to reread that. In kinematics, you don't ask for the reason behind anything. You simply want to describe things the way they are. And then dynamics tells you how and why that description changes with time. Okay, if we just simply think about this logically, if in kinematics we don't ask about the reason behind anything, what is causing anything, then could kinematics prove to you the cause of the observed phenomena? Of course not, because you are not even asking that question. Kinematics does not concern itself with that question. I know that sounds painfully redundant. It will start to make more sense as to why we have to be this redundant and hyper focused on the definitions of these two terms. Okay, next. Introduction, Principles of Dynamics. Principles of Dynamics is a subset of mechanics that deals with bodies in motion under the action of forces. The subject of dynamics is completely captured by Newton's second law, F equals ma. Of course, force equals mass times acceleration. To study dynamics, we must be able to handle correct force analysis. In the book, Difficult engineering concepts better explain, statics and applications, a vigorous method of force analysis named the ABCC method for constructing correct free body diagrams is presented. We will present the key elements of the ABCC method in chapter 2. The most important part being, again, very simply, that the principle of dynamics is a subset of mechanics that deals with bodies in motion under the action of forces. All right. Key points about kinematics. Number 1, it focuses on geometry of motion. Kinematics primarily deals with the mathematical description of motion using concepts like displacement, velocity, and acceleration without considering the forces involved. This is very redundant, but it will all make sense as to why in a moment. And it's actually quite baffling, the phenomena that takes place in this discussion about cosmology, despite the simplicity of the distinction between these two terms. Number 2, no force analysis. When studying kinematics, you only analyze the path and changes in an object's motion without considering the forces that caused those changes. You can even measure the speed. Number 3, it's not explanatory. Kinematics is merely descriptive, not explanatory. Math explains, or math describes, science explains. Kinematical descriptions plays no role in explaining the cause of the motion observed. Math describes, science explains. In physics, we are attempting to establish a cause and effect relationship. What is the causal mechanism that is causing the phenomena to happen? That is not what kinematics is about. Kinematics is a mathematical description, which is redundant because math is a description in and of itself. It is basically a language, merely a descriptive tool. Number 4, example applications. Analyzing the trajectory of a projectile, calculating the speed of a rotating wheel, or describing the movement of a robotic arm without considering the motor forces. All right. Key points about dynamics. Examines forces and their effects. Dynamics analyzes how forces acting on an object affect its motion, including changes in velocity and acceleration. Number 2, it's predictive. A proper understanding of the forces involved allow for true predictive capability. Alternatively, kinematics deals with what is presently known only. Very, very important. Very important. In fact, we'll even scoot back just a bit to really drive this point home. You see here, he uses the chalk example. For example, if you're talking about a piece of chalk, you'll want to know where it is and how fast it's moving. Kinematics is a complete description of the present. It's a list of what you have to know about a system right now. Dynamics is when you're going to get into prediction, because again, a proper understanding of the forces involved is going to allow you to predict what's going to happen. So, for example, when we see what we call planets moving in the sky and they move in a cycle, we map them out based on a ratio and a periodicity. So it periodically moves in certain cycles. We're able to map that out. And under the assumption it's going to just continue in that cycle, then we can have an idea of where it will be at a certain time. However, we cannot make a true prediction because if we don't make the claim or understand what is causing it, the force relationship, you can't predict it. You are merely taking the observational data. You're making an observation right then. That's the information that you have. You're mathematically describing it. Geometrically, in this case, you're just describing the motion. You're just basically taking notes. That's all you're doing. So, in order to make a quote unquote prediction, then it would be merely assumptive that the cycle remains the same because you don't have the tools required to make a prediction because you aren't invoking the cause of the motion. So, you can't actually make a prediction. Now, if you were to know for sure what forces are involved, what the force is specifically, how it interacts, all variables in terms of forces or anything that could counter the forces, then you could make a prediction based on knowing what would have to physically occur if those forces are present. This is very important to understand, and you will understand why in a moment if you do not already. All right. Let's move on to number 3. Dynamics, unlike kinematics, directly aims to address the causal mechanism of the motion observed. It is not merely mathematical, rather offers a real physical explanation. This is what physics actually is, and this is always conflated in modern times. The vast majority of people conflate these things. They say things like math is reality, math is science. It is not. Math is a tool. It's like a language. It describes things. This is very important to understand. Math describes, science explains. In physics, specifically, what we're trying to do is figure out how the world works, how it works, right? And why is actually kind of misapplied. It's how it works. Cause and effect relationship. For example, you have a naturally occurring observable phenomena, and you're like, you know what? I want to figure out how that works. What causes that phenomena? So that's going to be your dependent variable. And then what you're going to do is you're going to propose a hypothesis, a cause and effect relationship test, or that you can test, right? Yes, that you can test. And so the way that you do that is by assuming a cause. Based on your hypothesis, you're going to assume a cause. That's your independent variable, your presumed cause. You manipulate it, you establish a cause and effect relationship, and you either prove the hypothesis or prove the null hypothesis, right? The antithesis of the hypothesis, of course. So, long story short, that's what physics is. That's what science is. We're trying to discover how the world works. People are putting forth ideas as to what forces exist, how the forces work, what is the cause of the force, exactly how all of it works. What are the mechanisms that make these things happen, right? And so it's a conceptual mechanism that is being tested that is distinctly different from just describing what we observe with math. You can do mental gymnastics and say that Superman flies, here's how he flies. That doesn't mean Superman's real. That doesn't mean that he's flying over my house. None of that exists. None of that exists. Just because I can mathematically describe it. And relativity is a perfect example of the danger of putting all your chips on math, right? And Tesla has a famous quote about how they basically just dress up their pseudoscience with mathematical garb. Very important to understand this because although it seems very obvious right now, and if it wasn't in the context of this conversation, if you were having a conversation with almost anyone and you've had it be so redundant and elementary, where you just reiterate the distinctions here, everyone would just agree. It's very obvious. But when it starts to be applied, when we logically apply it to the conversation about cosmology, for some reason, people fight it. They're unable to grasp it. Something occurs where all of a sudden this very simple concept is confused. So let's continue. We'll go to number 4. Example applications: calculating the acceleration of a car due to an engine force and friction, analyzing the forces acting on a bridge under a load, or determining the stability of a rotating object. So these are all forces, right? Direct cause and effect relationships based on the force present. All right. So what's the historical significance as applied in terms of cosmology? The progression of cosmology goes as follows. It was universally accepted as a contained stationary topographical plane. that that's the cosmos, which means order. The entirety of the order was this very complex system, and the cyclical clock that moves over top of a stationary plane that was enclosed. And it transitioned to a minority proposing an idea that it was actually a stationary globe in the center of this universe, of this cosmos. And then it moved over to a globe orbiting the sun, which was allegedly at the center of the universe. And then we get to the current cosmology, right? More specifically, we have some key players here. We have Ptolemy, who maps out the planets in relation to the Earth in a geocentric model. We have Tycho Brahe, who continues down that path, and at that time, had the most in-depth and accurate observations in the world, as far as we know. Now, actually, I would push back on that. If you look into things like the Antikythera mechanism, and many things have been omitted, but this is kind of the mainstream acknowledged historical progression. And for intents and purposes, for understanding what's actually happening, what's going on, and how has progressed throughout time, it's more than enough. So then we have Kepler, right, who actually learned under Tycho Brahe. Interesting side note. Tycho Brahe died, and they recently tested his mustache and found that it had an insane amount of mercury in it, and suspected he was poisoned. And the number one suspect is Kepler, who, of course, got all of his teachings and all of his writings and all of his observational data. And so now we get over here, we have Kepler, and we have Kepler, who is famous for, of course, Kepler's laws, where he maps out the cyclical nature of the planets using kinematics, right? So Kepler's laws is just kinematics, very important. So it uses the radii and the periodicity of the planets, the cycle we observe them. And there's a relationship, a ratio between everything that we observe, between our position we're observing from, between the sun, between the stars and the planets. We see this system that's cyclical, and throughout many, many years of making observations and charting it down, they were able to identify a ratio that is relatively accurate. And we'll get more into depth with that in future streams. It's assumed that it's entirely accurate. It is not, actually. Kepler's laws are not entirely accurate, even on the local quote-unquote solar system scale, but that's further down the road of this series. So don't get triggered about that. If you disagree with it, fine. We'll cover that later. I just want you to understand exactly what kinematics is, and that's what Kepler's laws are. They're simply kinematic. Nothing more, nothing less. That is just objective. Very important. Okay, so then we get into Isaac Newton, of course, the guy famously who proposed the idea of gravity and came up with calculus before he was 22. Saw an apple and all of a sudden had an epiphany. Now, Newton actually explains that he's just putting forth an idea, doesn't necessarily have to be true. Obviously, we left some people off here. We left Galileo off. We left Copernicus off. It's just a general, it's just to lay out the historical progression as it applies to dynamics and kinematics. And so Newton talks about this idea of gravity. So we see that all these things move in relation to each other, and there is a relatively accurate ratio that everything moves, right? And you can map it out. It's cyclical. It just keeps on happening as far back as we can actually access any type of recorded data. So Newton comes along and proposes the idea that, well, there must be some innate property, some naturally built-in property of these planets that's causing this to happen. So he just calls it gravity, right? You just use the word. Now, gravity actually, gravitas, meaning heavy, right? The Greek word for heavy. So it's just that things are heavy. They have a weight. They have a heaviness. So that's an innate property of all matter. And so that's the line of reasoning there. It is no more profound than that. And Newton himself explains it's not any more profound than that. It's just, okay, he had the brilliant idea of saying, okay, well, we'll just say that there's a force caused by an innate property of the matter. That's all that he did. Um, and I thought about going more into depth about exactly how he did that, but I want to keep this concise and very simple and on topic. So long story short, if you don't know, Newton said, I don't know what it is. I don't know how it works. It's mind blowing to me. It must be a direct act of God. I have no idea. Don't ask me how it works. I don't know. Here's the math for whatever the force would be if it's an innate property. That's it. Okay. So that is a dynamic claim, ostensibly. Maybe not the perfect choice of words there, because if you are claiming a force relationship, the cause based on a force, that is dynamics, right? We just covered that redundantly and extensively, right? Now, the thing about it is, what he did was he took Kepler's laws and that kinematic relationship, and he just threw another variable in it, called it mass, right? Just threw that in there. So if you actually begin to solve the equations, they break down to just kinematics. So in fact, there is nothing revolutionary, nothing profound, nothing innovative, no groundbreaking, you know, science shattering revelation. None of that. It's just put in the variable in the kinematics. So in fact, all it is kinematics, because all he did was say, okay, well, there's got to be some type of force, and I don't know what it is. I can't define it. I can't describe it. I have no idea what it is. I'm just going to take this relationship and then throw the variable. And I'm going to say it has something to do with just the fact that it's matter. And he explains. It's like that's all I can come up with. It blows my mind. What the stuff in the sky does blows my mind. How it has to work, I have no idea. I can't really wrap my mind around it. Okay, so that's where you get the idea that Newton proposed a dynamic claim. That's, of course, gravity. Mass attracts mass is the way that it's been described. Probably most people that are new to the subject still think that's what gravity is accepted as, and that is not the case. Then you get into Einstein. Now, there's obviously tons that we will cover in this series throughout this progression. As it applies right now, we're talking about kinematics and dynamics. And Einstein, of course, comes in. He updates the dynamic claim, and he then says, gravity is actually not a force. It's the effect of the bending and warping of space-time, and that all motion is relative, and that nothing is stationary. Everything is moving, but you can only say that something's moving in relation to something else. Now, obviously, there's way more to it. Like I said, if you stick through the series, by the time we get further down into the episodes, we're going to really get into the heart of these matters. But you have to have a primary understanding of the concepts. And this is one confusion. This is confusion that extends into PhDs. To my surprise, it's pretty crazy. And so you fully grasping this in a genuine pursuit of truth is going to put you ahead of the vast majority of people that even are interested in the subject, believe it or not. Okay, so that's just kind of the general layout, right? You have kinematics, and so when you have Ptolemy and Copernicus and Tycho Brahe and Kepler, it's all kinematics. You have Newton acknowledging the need for a dynamic claim, but saying he has no idea what it is or how it works. He actually just took the kinematic equations and then just randomly plugged in a variable. And mass is a whole different subject because it's not even properly defined, and it's defined differently in different periods of time, right? So it's conceptual quantification of matter. Okay, let's continue. Here's the little video. You have Kepler. Now you have Ptolemy. You have Copernicus. You see we're going back around the sun. Then you have Tycho Brahe, who has things moving in relation to the sun as it moves around the Earth. All right. So here is the equivalence section. So just a few examples of things that are typically invoked but misunderstood. So we have orbits, of course. planet, plane, wandering star. They move around in a cycle, and they're orbiting in the sky. So it's often falsely claimed that the ability to map the trajectory of orbital paths is exclusive evidence of heliocentrism. So this is where you get Kepler's laws. And so many people will tell you Kepler's laws proves heliocentrism, and it does not. You have retrograde. That's if you're not familiar, it's where the planet will look like it's going backwards. It's often falsely claimed that retrograde is proof that it is the Earth that is moving around the sun. And because of the way that they cross paths, it creates the illusion that the planet's going backwards based on one body going faster and the other one basically passing it. And as you pass it, it's going to look like it's going backwards, although it's all supposedly moving around the sun. That's the heliocentric explanation for retrograde. Then you have parallax. Similarly, it is often falsely claimed that parallax can be explained due to the assumed orbital motion of Earth. And of course, parallax is just the slight deviation of stars. Basically, stars move, and they of course say that it is stars slightly move, and they claim it's not actually the star that's moving. That's just an illusion. It's that the Earth is moving. Right now, very similar to the next one, aberration, stellar aberration. Once again, the astronomical observation of stellar aberration is falsely presented as exclusive evidence of Earth's orbital motion. And again, it's an apparent shift in the position of the star due to the assumed relative motion of the Earth between the Earth and the star. So these are all things that will be invoked as proof that the Earth is orbiting around the sun. And this can only be invoked as proof of that if there is a gross lack of understanding of what the terms kinematic and dynamic means and how it applies. Okay, let's move to the next one. Got some visuals for you here to show the kinematic equivalence. So if you look here, this is the heliocentric model's parallax. So you see the Earth moving around the sun. If you look in the top, you'll see the view from Earth. So that's the heliocentric. You see the star slightly moving. Now you have the geocentric. Of course, this is the Earth not moving and everything in the sky moving around the Earth. And you'll see that the view from the Earth is exactly the same. Because it's just us describing the motion from what is experienced to be a stationary position with everything moving around us. The other side of the claim is that actually we're moving, you just can't tell, and it's an illusion that everything's moving around us. So, of course, when we look at the star's quote-unquote parallax, you just move the little central axis over, and it's identical. It's identical. So here's some more visuals for everyone to make sure that they kind of understand it. I know visuals help. You see, we're just going to move the axis over from the sun, the assumed center of rotation, to the Earth. Now, in the Tychonic model, which is being shown here, you have the planets moving around the sun as the sun moves around the Earth. This is going to make all observations identical, including retrograde, including the phases of any of these planets. And we'll get into all the depth of like the assumed causal mechanism, discrepancies with actual observations, such as the phases. The point is that they're identical in terms of the planet's paths, how they move, how they appear to move. It's very simple when you look at this visualization, right? It's not a complex idea. You're observing the planets from different positions. I just know visuals help people. Here's the annual retrograde from the Tychonic model. Of course, again, a geocentric model. So you see that it's going to look like the one planet's going backwards based on its position in relation to the Earth and the sun. So from the Earth, it'll look like that planet's going backwards in the sky at times, although it's not. We won't get into this too much because that's a dynamic claim when we start talking about angular momentum. Overall, very simple concept. We'll skip over the dynamic portion here. And like I said, it's going to be a very simple and concise stream. Okay. So gravity. The dynamic claim of the currently accepted model is gravity. There is admittedly not a currently accepted version of this claim that is truly viable. To make matters worse, both Newtonian and Einsteinian models of gravity are, at the least, equally valid within a geocentric model. So we just covered how kinematics, now what is kinematics again? It's just the observation of how things move, the measurement of moving variables, the mathematical description of motion, geometric acknowledgement, description of movement, acceleration, velocity, geometric trajectories, orbits, retrograde, parallax, aberration, the analemma of the sun. All of this is an observation of motion described kinematically. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more, nothing less. So intrinsically, none of those claims could ever prove that the Earth is actually moving around the sun. Because in the current paradigm, it is required, if you believe or are going to claim the Earth is moving around the sun, one must claim that there is a kinematic equivalence. Now, there's the other aspect, again, that's dynamic. We discussed Newton, the forces involved. The reason that I'm being so redundant, I'm just going to stamp down on it again here, because there's no excuses if you actually listen to this stream, right? The kinematics is oftentimes claimed to be exclusive evidence that the Earth is moving around the sun. The heliocentric model, although misnomer, it's the solar barycentric that's actually moving around the galaxy rotational center that's actually moving through the ever-expanding universe of emptiness while we're tucked away in an insignificant corner, etc. For intents and purposes, heliocentric model. People will say, oh, retrograde. Retrograde. How do you explain retrograde? Retrograde is proof of the heliocentric model. Parallax proves it. Aberration proves it. The seasons prove it, which is saying the analemma, the path we see the sun move throughout the year, allegedly proves that the sun is not moving. Your proof that the sun is not moving and the earth is moving is that the earth appears to be at rest and the sun moves in the sky. That's proof it's not moving. So the core claim has to say, oh, well, all motion is relative and it's just an illusion. You can flip it around and you can think that you're stationary, but actually you're moving. It's going to look like the stuff is moving in the sky, although it's actually not moving. It's just that you're moving, making it look like it's moving. Which, of course, relative motion in and of itself is a true concept, right? We all understand the concept. If you're moving in a train, right, and you see a tree. Now imagine if the tree was moving and you were stationary, it would look the same. The concept is very simple. Now, so we're going to set all of those. Now, you should immediately be asking yourself, wait, if I Google it, why does it tell me that that is proof? How is it 2024? And if I ask for proof the Earth moves around the sun or proof of the heliocentric model or something to disprove the geocentric model or a geocentric model, why is the only answer you get kinematics? That's inaccurate, fundamentally, right? Now, you get into the dynamic aspect, and that's where you get gravity. Now, we don't have time to go into the depth of all of these concepts here, certainly gravity, but we will cover it in the future. But it's very important that we get this understanding at the beginning. And that's why I'm being painfully redundant. And I really, really hope everyone is on the same page here. So I put here, to make matters worse, both Newtonian and Einsteinian models of gravity are at the least equally valid within the geocentric model. And again, to reiterate, the dynamic claim of the currently accepted model is gravity, quote unquote. There is admittedly not a currently accepted version of gravity that is truly viable. That's
That's well known, right? That's why people are proposing this idea of modified Newtonian dynamics to replace relativity or Einsteinian dynamics because it doesn't work, right? And it's off. You need dark matter, but that's just a made-up idea to save the idea of gravity. And of course, the relativity was moved to away from Newtonian gravity because it didn't work to explain the heliocentric model due to many observations, for example, Michelson-Morley. Okay, now this is very important to understand. We'll cover this more in depth, and sure, you can challenge it right now because the stream is not going to fully substantiate this claim, but I can assure you that this is the case. Although there's not even an actual claimed version of gravity that's viable within the heliocentric paradigm, the modern Big Bang dark matter, cold dark matter universe, right? The cosmology accepted in the mainstream. But even worse than that, the two most recent ones, most people think relativity is accepted, and then most people will tell you that gravity is just mass attracting mass, and then they're told these ideas that they parrot that they're the same, that Einstein and Newton are the same, and all Einstein did was build on Newton, and it's the same thing. They are not the same thing. And this comes back to not understanding the difference in kinematics and dynamics. The fact that if an object falls, and we're going to say, okay, let's describe it. 9.8 meters per second squared is roughly the average rate at which things fall when they fall down. So I can use Einstein, I can use Newton, I can use any version of it that's mathematically describing it, right? Yeah, that's a kinematic description. I can use just a kinematic equation and tell you that the object's going to fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. You can use height, initial velocity, and time, purely kinematic variables, and you can get 9.8 meters per second squared, right? And accurately describe the fall of an object. Dynamics is, again, the causal mechanism. It's explaining the cause of it, how it works. Newton and Einstein claimed very different things. In fact, opposing ideas were claimed. One says gravity is a force based on it's an innate property of matter. And then Einstein said, wait, gravity is not a force. It's actually just the effect of the bending and warping of space-time, right? Newton said that space is absolute and fixed and everything moves in relation to it. Einstein said, no, space is specifically not absolute and fixed. Newtonian gravity required there be an ether, some type of medium that was interconnected with mutual contact. Einstein's theory specifically required the removal of the idea of ether. And there are many other blatant contradictions that cannot be true. It's because they're different claims of physics. They're different theoretical physics claims. They're different causal mechanism claims. Ideas are fundamentally different. They're dynamically opposed. They cannot both be true. What people do is they revert. Now, the same people that would listen to the beginning like, we get it. Why does he keep saying this? Of course, are the same people that will end up reverting back to conflating them by saying that Newton and Einstein are the same, and that that Einstein just built upon Newton, that they're both equally valid, they're both true, or whatever. Incorrect. There's a difference in kinematics and dynamics. It is the most important concept to understand. You have to learn how to identify the difference. And I found out that even having a PhD doesn't guarantee that you can do that in 2024. PhD in astronomy, PhD in astrophysics, they conflate these all the time. Okay, so long story short, whether it's Newtonian or Einsteinian, which are both wrong, they both work with a geocentric model. Even if they were true, which they're not, right? They both work with a geocentric model. And this can be shown many different ways, right? There's a dynamic equivalence with both of those gravitational models, which neither of them work. So we will cover that in a future stream more in depth, of course. So here are the results. Number one, astronomical observations of celestial motion are merely kinematical descriptions, and as such, offer no exclusivity. In fact, exclusivity can only come by way of kinematics in terms of falsification of orbital motion. In fact, exclusivity can only come by way of kinematics in terms of falsification of orbital motion. This is because a highly specific cosmological claim has physical limitations. Very simply, if you make the claim the Earth is a sphere that's tilted, wobbling, spinning, so rotating on an axis, revolving around the sun, and that the planets are certain sizes and certain distances and certain masses, and they have a certain gravitational relationship, and they're all moving around the sun at a certain velocity, a certain rate, That is a very specific claim. So in fact, kinematics can refute that claim, because if you're making highly specific claims about the model, you could, in theory, make an observation of the motion that doesn't match that model, and it would falsify it. So I'm sure people will be like, oh, this doesn't seem fair. So it can falsify my model, but not yours. Well, I would have to make a definitive claim as to a model, which I'm not doing. What I'm pointing out is there are many different viable geocentric models. A neotychonic model, for example, there are many. There are very many of them, because again, the kinematics doesn't mean anything other than we know that there's an observation that takes place. So yeah, I get why this is unfortunate for the side believing in the mainstream model, but I won't reveal it yet. But just so you know, such an observation does exist. And to give you an example of it, the perihelion shift of Mercury did not match and does not match the heliocentric model's predictions. Doesn't match. This is why this idea of the infallibility of Kepler's laws is incorrect. It has problems with Mercury, it has problems with Mars, and it has problems with other planets. We'll discuss that in the future. Okay, number 2. There is intrinsically a kinematic equivalence with the geostatic position within the currently accepted model, as due to unexpected and unpredicted experiments/measurements. The current model must integrate the primary claims of relativity. So due to these unexpected and unpredicted experiments and measurements, such as Michelson-Morley, Airy's failure, and the list goes on, and subsequent replications, the current model had to update and integrate the idea of relativity, the primary claims of relativity, to be specific, right? Had to. Specifically that orbits are linear and it's free falling and there is no acceleration, there is no force acting on an object, moving it from its linear path. An object will continue in a straight path unless an outside force acts upon it. To claim the heliocentric model is true, based on all these different observations, measurements, and experiments that we've done to this point, you have to say, oh, well, that's not true. An object can go in a straight path and a curved path at the same time, and it can leave a straight path without a force acting upon it, and that orbits are actually curved paths, quote unquote, but really from the Earth or from whatever it is that's orbiting, you're just free falling in a linear path, and that gravity that's causing it is actually not a cause in and of itself. It's the effect of the bending and warping of space and time, or something to that effect. Specifically, what is required no matter what, whether you get rid of relativity or not, you have to claim that that's the fundamental nature of the orbit to explain things that have been done that refuted the previous understanding or assumption of heliocentrism. Okay, so hopefully that was not too much of an overload, but very important. Very important. So because of this required concession and integration of the principles of relativity, right? And I don't want to get too much into the claims of relativity right now, because we're almost wrapping this up. You have to say that a geostatic, a stationary Earth position, is equally valid. It's required. So, hence, here's the conclusion. All astronomical observations are purely kinematical in nature, and as such can be equally explained from a geostatic position. In fact, the currently accepted mainstream cosmological model necessitates this acknowledgement due to relative motion. Hence, the problem which now faced science was considerable, for there seemed to be only 3 alternatives. The first was that the Earth was standing still, which meant scuttling the whole Copernican theory and was unthinkable. This is in reference to Michelson-Morley. What did they do? And they updated the model with Einsteinian relativity. The struggle, so violent in the early days of science between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus, i.e., geocentrism and heliocentrism, would then be quite meaningless. Either coordinate system could be used with equal justification. The 2 sentences, quote, the sun is at rest and the earth moves, or, quote, the sun moves and the earth is at rest, would simply mean 2 different conventions concerning 2 different coordinate systems. That's Albert Einstein, The Evolution of Physics, From Early Concepts to Relativity and Quanta, page 224, 1938. This is him saying that all kinematic descriptions, I must concede as a heliocentrist. This is what he's saying, that all of those are merely a coordinate system based on the theory that we now have to put forward to explain the idea that the Earth is orbiting the sun. All of those can be equally explained if the Earth is at rest. So conclusion, long story short, geocentrism is actually superior in viability. The conflation of kinematics and dynamics is a rudimentary lack of understanding. And to explain this slide, which I kind of breezed over it, again, all the dynamics, for example, if you pick Einstein or Newton, they both work with geocentrism, which I'll explain in the future. But it actually doesn't even matter because those don't work for heliocentrism. The heliocentric paradigm doesn't even have a dynamic claim. Literally doesn't. That's why people are proposing modified Newtonian dynamics to try to replace it, to try to fix it, but no one can come up with anything. It's been like a century, no one can come up with anything. Over a century, people have tried to figure out this problem. They can't. So not only does the kinematics not exclusively verify the claim that the Earth is moving around the sun, because the model claims that literally isn't the case, and it couldn't do that. You don't even have a dynamic claim, much less exclusivity. Now, in reality, the heliocentric model is not nearly as viable, right? The geocentric model is far superior because, for example, we made astronomical observations in quote-unquote deep space. Everything seemed to be moving around the Earth. Well, that's what the center Earth position would say. A geostatic position, a geocentric position would say everything's moving around the Earth. Well, that's what we observed, right? So the heliocentric paradigm, the current paradigm, had to say, oh, well, that's an illusion, had to come up with dark energy, right? And then they had to come up with dark matter to explain the gravitational discrepancies. And so in reality, the geocentric model is far superior, and we'll get more into depth in that in the future. But just to recap the stream, right? We have kinematics, we have dynamics. Kinematics is just the description of how bodies move. It's very important to understand this. You should be able to understand it. And if you have to watch a stream and pause it and think about what's being said, I'll put the PowerPoint publicly available. Make sure you understand this concept is very important. Very important, very simple, but make sure you understand it to the point that you should be able to spot out when things are kinematic and when things are dynamic. And so anything that's just an observation of something moving, that's kinematic. So it's like, hey, look, the planet looks like it's going backwards, retrograde. That's kinematics. Hey, the star looks like it's slightly moving or deviating from its position. Slightly what? Moving. That's kinematics. Hey, throughout the year, the sun moves in an analemma and it changes its path at an angle, an ecliptic path, an ecliptic plane. Oh, it's moving. We're observing it moving. We're measuring it. We're describing it geometrically. Kinematics. Stellar aberration, the displacement of the star. Again, kinematics. The way that the planets move in relation to each other, kinematics. Okay? All these things are kinematics. Nothing kinematic can prove the Earth is orbiting around the sun or that heliocentrism is true and that geocentrism is untrue, objectively. Yet, that is the only alleged proofs that you're going to find for heliocentrism in 2024 from the mainstream sources. Go look for it. Go look for it. And almost everyone that defends it and believes in it, they will bring all of these things up with the utmost confidence. And only the people that have listened to the dissidents, right, will actually be informed enough to know this. And it should be very telling to you. How has this paradigm existed? How is everyone in on it? It's like, no, there's just a rudimentary misunderstanding and misapplication of concepts as simple as kinematics and dynamics. It's the linchpin. It's you, in order to push the current model and defend it and act like it's true, you have to be able to conflate and pick and choose and move it around and pretend that, kinematics is dynamics and vice versa. So, and specifically, whenever you're asked for evidence and you're supposed to be coming up with some type of dynamic exclusivity and are proof that the Earth's moving around the sun, people always revert back to kinematic claims. So it's, although they've already conceded the kinematic equivalence. So hopefully I'm not overloading you too much. It's very simple. Objects move in relation to something else, right? How that object moves and how we describe it moving, kinematics. What causes it to move? What's the force? What's the causal mechanism? The cause and effect relationship. There's a force causing that object to move. What is that force? How does it work? How much force is there, right? We can predict where it's going to be if we properly identify that force. Dynamics. Two very different things. Very important to understand the difference. The reason is because we run into things like conflating Einstein and Newtonian gravity as if they can both be true simultaneously because they both give us the same mathematical output in certain scenarios. But if you know that the math is just describing the effect, the motion, then that isn't in any way a path to claiming that they're the same or that they're both true, because they make different dynamic claims, and the dynamic claims are opposed to each other. They're the opposite. They can't both be true. So and the reason you run into this is because people want to invoke Newtonian gravity on smaller scales because it's simpler. The math is simpler. They think, oh, it works good enough. No, it has dynamic implications. You can't invoke both of them. They can't both be true. That's one example, one of the biggest examples of why it's so important to understand the difference in kinematics and dynamics. And if anyone's being intellectually honest at all, regardless of what position you hold, you would stop doing that. You would stop conflating them and claiming that they can both be true and picking and choosing when you want to use them. You would stop doing that because that's dishonest. You would stop claiming that retrograde and aberration and stuff like this is proof that the Earth moves around the sun, because there's admittedly a kinematic equivalence. It's people act like that's a big phrase and they say you're just trying to use big words. We just cover what kinematic means. It's what the word is. Equivalence. We all know what that means, right? Something is equivalent. It's equally valid. There's a kinematic equivalence. The carriage moves on the road moves under the carriage. That's the analogy that Einstein used. The train moves, I see the trees move, or the train's still and the trees are moving. You know, kinematically, you can describe it both ways. Equivalent. Okay? So, hopefully that makes sense. Very important concept to understand. And it is of the utmost importance. And once you're intellectually honest enough to not only truly understand that, but then looking for truth, properly apply it to this conversation and all the evidence, the observations, the claims, the alleged claims of evidence of exclusivity and the mainstream model, when you actually apply this understanding, it all crumbles like a house of cards. And I've yet to find almost anyone that's super confident in the mainstream model that doesn't use this trick where they conflate the two, they flip-flop, they get confused, they don't seem to know the difference, or they're intentionally choosing to do it anyway, dishonestly. So very important. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. And that was Middle Ground, Episode 2, Kinematics and Dynamics. And like I said, I know the stream was very redundant. If you guys knew how reoccurring this issue was, then you would understand. Understanding the general premise, the philosophical bias, the philosophical preference in the Copernican principle, and then exactly what we're talking about in the first place, which is the Earth is either moving or it's not moving, and objects are either moving around the Earth or the Earth is moving around the objects, making it look like the Earth is moving around, or they're moving around the Earth, quote unquote objects, right? So the celestial motion, what is it that's actually moving? That's the heart of the discussion. And we must understand how it is that we have that discussion. What does it mean? What are the descriptions of these things? And it's kinematic and it's dynamic. It's the fact that objects move, how they, and we describe how they move geometrically, mathematically. And then there is what's causing them to do that. How do they move like that? Right? Okay, cool. I'll come over here and check out Super Chat super quick. Regis, thank you for the $10 super chat on YouTube. Never been forsaken. The Father loves you, bro. Keep on walking hand in hand with him as he never left our Savior in the tomb. He won't leave you either. Thank you so much for the $10 and the kind words. Much love. Byron Johnson, thank you for the $20 super chat. Great job on debate against Shelley. He said eclipses support ball Earth. Please look up Europe's Proba 3, fake. He said astronauts read scriptures. Please note Luciferian Scottish right flag to moon during Apollo 11. Yeah, for sure. They did a lot of Masonic stuff. Thanks. Thank you. Justin Padilla, $20. Keep up the good work, bro. Thank you so much. And thank you for the support. Nick Carey, $5. Has Professor Parks come back with that research she was going to provide following the debate? I don't know. Good question. I haven't heard of that happening. I can ask. I don't think so, though. And let me double check. Kofi. We do have a goal on Kofi right now because we had an issue. I don't want to get too much into it. We're going to wrap the stream up, keep it right at an hour. But, people are trying to hijack my stuff and send me all kinds of threats and doxed personal information and got into a bunch of my accounts, but it is what it is. Love the new format, man. Concise and very edifying. Thank you for all your work. Thank you so much, November. Also on Kofi. Thank you. You and Zerka need to collab again. You were a dynamic duo on MDD. Thanks for all you do and keep up the great work. Yeah, I'm definitely down. We've talked about it. Globe Disrespected. Thank you so much. Anonymous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Angling Alchemy. You're a legend, bro. Thank you so much. Thank you for the $10. Liliana. Legend. Thanks for all you do for us. What's it, G? Liliana here. God bless. Thank you so much for $25. Much love. All right, I love you guys. Consider being a member. We've already had some private hangouts, and we're going to start doing a lot more stuff. So cool. That was episode 2. Like I said, we're going to keep it super concise. Episode 2, kinematics and dynamics. Now that we've kind of got the basics covered, we're going to get more into subject-specific streams in the future. So it should be cool. Also, just throw it out there, I think we may be doing an election hangout stream. I think I got some good ideas. I've never really seen a bunch of truthers who aren't like really buying into the whole political system stream it. So I think it'd be cool to get a bunch of like the OG truthers to hang out and just do a long form stream where people can kind of come and go if they need to, turn their cameras off if they need to. But we just hang out, we talk, we chat, we keep up with the play that is the election tomorrow night. So check out that. I'll post it up here soon. We'll determine a time. And I think that we're going to do that. So seek and speak truth unequivocally. The weak find contentment in the consensus of ignorance. So who cares what other people think? I salute you if you have realized the potential implications of this discussion are so important that you're willing to actually invest the time and energy to actually wrap your mind around it and try to understand it. I applaud that. It is definitely worth investigating. It is a huge deal. And if you're honest, you know that this would be a huge deal if the Earth actually was in the center of the entire universe. And there's just an immense effort to make sure you don't even know anything about the evidence and what's really going on and you're being lied to. So I applaud you. I encourage you to keep on researching it. Once you understand some of these key deceptions and conflations, you're going to see it clearer than you could ever imagine. And once you see it, you're going to be amazed that you were ever deceived. So don't worry about what other people say. They're going to attack you prior to even understanding it. And it is what it is. And when they revile you, rejoice. Because they did that to all the prophets before you. That's how it goes. And remember, what's true is rarely popular. What's popular is rarely true. Peace.
Cause he had a scheme. Said the sun's the star of the scene. But what if we got a new dream? Shattering the heliocentric meme. Little cloud where we found Earth that rust, spin around. Lines of truth break the sound. With a center watch us bound. Scientism got the
I had to come back. I saw people super chat and I miss it and it was generous. So I don't want to be that guy. So Daniel McLaughlin, thank you for the very generous $100 super chat. Keep up the good work. Much love. Thank you so much, man. Shout out to you. Much love. Flat Earth Quebec, thank you for the $10. Kingdom Context, let's get those super chats up. People, shout out to Kingdom Context. We got to do another stream soon. Thank you guys. I had to come back and show you guys some love. I don't want you guys to think I'm leaving you hanging. So thank you for the very generous $100. Thank you, Kingdom Context as well. Thank you, everyone that donated. And I'm going to leave now. So, well, one popped in. DJ Curious, great work. What's it? You have amazing patience. It's next to godliness. Keep up the hard work. Thank you for the kind words. Still working on it. I lose my patience for sure, but I appreciate the kind words. All right, I love you guys. I'm actually going to go this time. Sorry if I missed anything. I'll try to shout you guys out. Make sure you follow on Telegram, t.me/Witsit streams to get the PowerPoints and stuff. And we'll have an entire database up before the next episode for sure, where each stream will have all the accompanying PowerPoints, data, explanations, transcripts, summarized, everything that you need. So you always have a database that goes right along with the Middle Ground series so that you can send it to people that you can understand and that you can review it yourself. Okay, I love you guys. I'll catch up with you tomorrow for the election stream, and much love.
Copernicus, he had a scheme, said the sun's the star of the scene. But what if we got a new dream, shattering the heliocentric mean? Little cloud where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth break the sound, with a center watch us bound. Scientism got the praise, hiding facts in twisted ways. Geocentric glory days, lost in all the cosmic haze. Little cloud where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth break the sound, with the center watch us bound. Philosophy, not science here. Copernican whispers in your ear. Truth is close, never fear. Look around, make it clear. Little crowd where we found Earth at rest, spin around, lines of truth break the sound, with the center watch us bound. Watch us bound. Watch us bound. Philosophy, not science here. Copernican whispers in your ear. Truth is close.